If you've ever adhered strictly to a baking recipe, you've likely observed that certain recipes specify baking soda, while others require baking powder. Occasionally, a recipe even necessitates both ingredients. Initially, they appear nearly indistinguishable. White powdery substances stored in small containers in your cupboard. However, here's the crucial detail. They're fundamentally different. Actually, confusing them could represent the distinction between light, beautifully risen pancakes and a heavy, deflated disappointment. So, today we'll examine what they are, how they function, why they differ, and even some unexpected applications for them beyond baking. Let's explore the intriguing realm of baking soda versus baking powder. By the conclusion, you'll understand precisely which one to select the next time you're preparing a batch of cupcakes or cookies. Let's begin right here on Stories Behind Everything. Let's commence with baking soda. Chemically, it's identified as sodium bicarbonate, a straightforward alkaline compound that activates when it encounters acid. Independently, baking soda remains relatively inert, but the transformation begins the instant it contacts something acidic, like citrus juice, vinegar, buttermilk, or even cocoa powder. For thousands of years, bakers relied on yeast, a slow and unpredictable process. Everything changed in the early 1800s when German chemists isolated pure sodium bicarbonate, and Americans John Dwight and Austin Church established the first baking soda factory, creating what became Arm and Hammer. In 1843, British chemist Alfred invented true baking powder for his wife, who had yeast and egg allergies, combining bicarbonate with cream of tartar. However, this remained expensive until the 1850s, when Harvard professor Eben Norton Horsford developed an affordable alternative using calcium acid phosphate. By 1889, double-acting baking powder transformed home baking from unpredictable art into reliable science. When that chemical reaction occurs, carbon dioxide gas is generated, and those tiny gas bubbles become trapped within your batter or dough, causing it to expand, elevate, and develop an airy texture. This is precisely why baking soda is termed a leavening agent. It genuinely helps your baked creations lift. However, there's a complication. Baking soda reacts almost immediately. The instant it contacts an acid, the bubbles begin forming. That's precisely why recipes utilizing only baking soda frequently instruct you to bake without delay. If you delay too long, those bubbles dissipate, and your muffins or cakes could emerge flat rather than fluffy. Now, baking powder is somewhat more sophisticated. Consider it as baking soda's more autonomous relative. Baking powder already incorporates both an acid and a base, all in one convenient package. Typically, it comprises a mixture of baking soda, cream of tartar, which supplies the acid, and occasionally cornstarch to maintain dryness and prevent solidification. The genuine brilliance of baking powder is that it doesn't require you to introduce additional acidic ingredients to the recipe. It's already prepared to activate. Simply incorporate it into your batter, and the chemical reaction can proceed. But here's where it becomes fascinating. Most baking powders available today are double-acting. This means they operate in two phases. The initial reaction happens when the powder becomes moist, such as when you blend it into your cake batter. The secondary reaction initiates only when it's exposed to heat in the oven. This two-phase process provides your baked goods an additional rise and assists them in rising uniformly, even if you don't immediately rush to bake the mixture. Here's a question that numerous home bakers contemplate. Can you interchange baking soda and baking powder? The brief answer: not directly. If you accidentally utilize baking soda instead of baking powder, your recipe might not rise whatsoever, unless the batter happens to contain an acid. Even then, the flavor could develop a somewhat metallic or soapy quality, because baking soda is considerably stronger and more concentrated than baking powder. Conversely, If you attempt using baking powder instead of baking soda, your baked goods might rise, but the flavor and consistency could be incorrect. Since baking powder already contains acid, it might render your recipe taste slightly tangy. And because it's weaker than baking soda, you might not achieve sufficient lift. So, the fundamental rule is, utilize what the recipe specifies. And if you're in an emergency situation, you can occasionally make a substitution, but you'll need to modify the measurements and equilibrate the acid levels meticulously. Here's another baking puzzle. Why would a recipe incorporate both baking soda and baking powder? If one is adequate to make things rise, why introduce the other? The explanation resides in flavor and equilibrium. Some recipes contain acidic ingredients, but insufficient amounts to fully activate with the baking soda. So, a small amount of baking soda is added to neutralize some of that acidity and contribute to browning, while baking powder manages the additional leavening. An excellent example is chocolate cake. Cocoa powder is moderately acidic, but not acidic enough independently. So, recipes frequently require both baking soda and baking powder to achieve the proper lift, flavor, and texture. Now, here's where things become entertaining. Both baking soda and baking powder have applications outside the oven. Baking soda is renowned as a natural cleaning agent. People utilize it to scrub sinks, deodorize refrigerators, and even refresh carpets. It's mildly abrasive, which makes it excellent for cleaning without damaging surfaces. It also assists in neutralizing odors, whether it's your garbage bin, athletic shoes, or even your breath when used as a toothpaste alternative. Baking powder, conversely, doesn't possess nearly as many alternative uses. It's predominantly a baking ingredient, though some individuals have experimented with it in cleaning applications. But if you're seeking to deodorize your refrigerator, stay with baking soda. It's the versatile option. Let's discuss a few common errors people make when using these ingredients. Using excessive baking soda can leave a metallic, bitter taste. A small amount goes a considerable distance. Not baking immediately with baking soda. Remember, its reaction commences instantly. Delay too long and the bubbles escape. Forgetting that baking powder expires. Yes, baking powder loses its potency over time. If yours has been sitting in the pantry for years, test it by combining a little with hot water. If it doesn't fizz, it's time to replace it. Swapping them without adjusting proportions, they're not one-to-one substitutes. If you must substitute, research the correct ratios to avoid a baking failure. So, what's the essential takeaway? Baking soda and baking powder may appear identical, but they serve different functions in your kitchen. Baking soda requires an acid to activate and operates rapidly, while baking powder has its own acid integrated and typically acts in 2 stages for a more dependable rise. The next time you're preparing banana bread or pancakes, you'll comprehend exactly why your recipe specifies one over the other. It's not arbitrary. It's chemistry in action, transforming simple ingredients into something fluffy, delicious, and irresistible. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you proper recognition for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this exploration through stories behind everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories discovered through the smallest details.